She put a $10 lock on a door in my own house. She thought it was a symbol of her control. She didn't realize it was the key that finally woke me up. They saw a weak old woman, easy to manage. So I prepared a $500,000 eviction notice. They forgot I spent 40 years managing an entire library system. I know exactly how to handle overdue accounts. My name is Margaret Reynolds. I am 68 years old, and for 40 of those years, I was the head librarian for the Clearwater County Library System. I managed 3 branches, a staff of dozens, and an annual budget that would make most city councilmen sweat. I tell you this not to boast, but to establish a fact. I am a woman of systems, of order, and of quiet, unyielding resolve. A library does not run on goodwill alone. It runs on rules, consequences, and the absolute certainty that every book and every person is in its proper place. Last night, I returned home from my volunteer shift at the community centre. It was just after 8. The bones in my feet felt like a bag of loose gravel, and the ache in my lower back was a familiar, dull fire. I have arthritis. It is a tedious, unglamorous affliction. But it is mine. The house was cold. Not just cool, but cold. The way a house gets when the thermostat is being managed by someone who doesn't pay the bill, but enjoys the sensation of saving money. Frank, my late husband, always kept it warm. I want to feel comfortable in my own home. Mags, he would say. I miss that warmth. I miss Frank. I slipped off my shoes at the door, wincing as my stocking feet hit the cold tile of the foyer. Brenda and my son, Kevin, had taken up the Persian rug Frank and I bought in 1992. It's a tripping hazard, Mother Margaret, Brenda had declared. All bright efficiency. This tile is much cleaner. My goal was simple. I wanted one thing. One small comfort, to end a long day of sorting donated clothing from people who thought gently used meant stained and torn. I was heading for the pantry. My pantry. On the second shelf, behind the organic quinoa I never touched and the steel-cut oats, there was a blue tin of ginger snaps. My ginger snaps. The expensive ones. Sharp with real ginger. I turned the corner into my kitchen, and I stopped. It was hanging there, glinting under the harsh LED light Brenda had insisted on installing. A padlock. A new, cheap, brass-coloured padlock, hooked through a heavy-duty hasp that had been drilled directly into the pantry doorframe. My doorframe. The wood was splintered slightly where the screws had gone in. For a full minute, I did not move. I just stared. It was so incongruous, so profoundly, absurdly insulting. A lock. In my own kitchen. My hand moved before my mind did. I reached out and touched it. The metal was cold, smooth, and shockingly real. It was a solid, tangible object of contempt. This was not my house. The realization hit me not as a slow dawning dread, but as a physical blow. Oh, you're home. Brenda drifted into the kitchen, her face illuminated by the blue light of her phone. She was scrolling, thumb flicking rapidly. She didn't look up. We got some of that special diet food today, she said, her voice absent. The delivery was expensive. Just wanted to keep it separate. She still hadn't looked at me. The casualness of it, the utter lack of shame or even awareness, was somehow more offensive than the hardware itself. The lock was an act of aggression. Her indifference was an act of erasure. My voice came out, a dry, reedy thing I barely recognized. Separate in my own kitchen. Brenda. that made her stop scrolling. She finally lifted her head, and her eyes, flat and passionless, met mine. There was no apology there, no guilt, just impatience. "Don't be dramatic. Mother Margaret," she said, her voice sighing with exasperation. "It's just organization. Things were getting all mixed up. We're trying to help you." Help me. Organization. These were the words she used to dismantle my life. I have dealt with angry patrons, with budget committees, with screaming toddlers in the children's section, and with the quiet despair of the illiterate. For 40 years, I perfected a public-facing calm. My face is a mask of polite inquiry, honed by a lifetime of professional composure. I assembled that mask now. I felt the muscles in my cheeks pull into the shape of a smile, thin and brittle. "Of course, dear," I said. "How very efficient." I turned without waiting for an answer I did not want. I walked back down the hall, each step on the cold tile a small, sharp pain. I went into my bedroom, the one room that was still, for the most part, mine, and closed the door. I did not cry. I did not rail. I sat on the edge of my bed in the dark. I listened to the phantom sound of that lock clicking shut, a sound that echoed the closing of 1,000 other small doors over the last 2 years. The grief I had felt since Frank died was gone. In its place, a new feeling was settling. It was heavy and cold and hard. It was a perfect, crystalline rage. And it was, for the first time in a very long time, entirely my own. This didn't start with the lock. A lock is just a symptom. It's the final, clumsy, arrogant punctuation mark on a sentence that has been writing itself for 2 years. It started the day Frank died. He was in the garden, tying up his heirloom tomatoes. The sun was hot. An aneurysm, the doctor said later. Instant. He wouldn't have felt a thing. He was 69 years old, retired only 3 months, and he was gone. He left me in the garden, kneeling beside him, the smell of damp earth and tomato vines filling my lungs. After the funeral, the house on Maple Creek was too large. Its silence was a physical thing, a heavy, suffocating blanket. Every creak of the floorboards, every hum of the refrigerator, was a reminder of the thundering, vital noise of Frank that was no longer there. Kevin, my son, and his wife, Brenda, arrived from the city, dressed in tasteful, somber black. Kevin held my hand, his own hand clammy and soft. "Mum, you can't be alone in this huge house," he said, his voice thick with what I thought was concern. Brenda stood beside him, rubbing his back, her eyes already scanning the living room, taking inventory. "He's right. Mother Margaret, it's not safe. We'll move in. Just for a little while. Just until you're back on your feet. Just for a little while." It became their mantra. It was the excuse for everything that followed. The first month was a fog. It was a blur of sympathetic neighbours, baked ziti in disposable foil pans, and a river of condolence cards that I could not bring myself to read. Joyce, my oldest friend, came by every day to make tea. Kevin and Brenda were present. They handled the phone calls. They moved their things into the guest rooms upstairs. I was grateful, in a numb sort of way. I was a widow, adrift, and I mistook their presence for a lifeline. Then the casseroles stopped, and the help began. Brenda started in the kitchen. "This whole setup is just so dated. Mother Margaret?" she said one morning, her nose wrinkled at my butcher block countertops. "All this, heavy oak. It's dark." Let me just streamline things for you. Make it more efficient? Streamline was the word. Efficient was the justification. The first major piece of my life to be streamlined was Frank's armchair. It was a huge, worn, burgundy leather recliner that had moulded itself to his shape over 30 years. The springs groaned, the leather was cracked, and I could still see the faint grease spot on the headrest from his hair. I loved that chair. I came home from a grief counselling meeting, and it was gone. In its place, pushed against the wall, was a sterile, white leather love seat. It was low to the ground and hard, the kind of furniture you see in a therapist's waiting room. "Brenda?" I asked, my voice hollow in the suddenly empty-looking room. "Where is Frank's chair?" She walked in from the kitchen, wiping her hands. "Oh, that old thing, Mother Margaret. It was an eyesore. It smelled. We donated it to Goodwill. Doesn't this look so much brighter, so much cleaner? I've never sat on that white love seat. I'm afraid I'll leave a mark." The invasion accelerated. My home office, my sanctuary, was next. It was a small room, but it was mine. It held 40 years of my life, my books, my research, and plaques from the Library Association, my Librarian of the Year award from 1998. "Mum, I'm working remotely full-time now," Kevin announced, not quite meeting my eyes. "Brenda thinks it's unprofessional for me to take Zoom calls from the guest room. We need a dedicated space." It was no longer my office. It was Kevin's remote workspace. My books were packed into cardboard boxes and moved to the damp garage. My awards, my 40 years of service, were piled in a shoebox and shoved into the back of my own closet. I let it happen. I see that now. Sitting here in the dark. I was a 68-year-old woman paralyzed by loss. I mistook their aggression for care. I mistook their invasion for concern. And worst of all, I mistook my own stunned silence, my own unwillingness to cause a scene in the face of my own grief, for strength. I thought I was being stoic. I was just being erased. Frank's chair was just the beginning. The territorial invasion was systematic, a creeping mold that covered everything. My rose garden was next. Frank had planted it for me on our 10th anniversary. 28 bushes of heirloom varieties, each one sourced from a different nursery. He called them my committee of blooms, and I would spend hours out there, cutting back the deadheads, my hands covered in dirt and my heart full. I came home from my volunteer shift one afternoon last spring and found a team of landscapers in the backyard. They were digging up my roses, all 28 of them. I stood on the patio, mute, as they tossed the thorny, bleeding roots into a wheelbarrow. Brenda was directing them from a lounge chair, a glass of iced tea in her hand. She was wearing sunglasses. "Oh, hi, Mother Margaret," she called out, waving. "We're putting in a fire pit. It's going to be amazing for entertaining. Those old bushes were just so scratchy and high maintenance." They built a circle of grey stones in the middle of the lawn, a scar on the grass. They used it exactly one time, for a party with their loud friends, a party I was not invited to. I listened to their hollow laughter from my bedroom window. Now, the pit is just a circle of weeds and rain-soaked ash. Then, they came for my dining room. It was the heart of our home. Frank and I had hosted every Thanksgiving, every Christmas Eve, every family birthday at that table for 35 years. It was a solid mahogany table, a wedding gift from my parents, and it could seat 14 people. It held the echoes of 1,000 family arguments, 1,000,000 laughs, and the ghost of Frank at its head. carving the turkey. No one does formal dinners anymore, Mother Margaret, Brenda explained, as if speaking to a child. She had her hands on her hips. It's just dead space. All this heavy, dark furniture. It's depressing. Kevin, my son, helped her move it. He wouldn't look at me. They sold the table and the matching hutch on some internet marketplace. Now, the room is empty, save for a purple mat on the floor. It is Brenda's yoga room. The room that once smelled of roast beef and cinnamon now smells faintly of incense and her sweat. The house was no longer a home. It was a territory, and I was losing it, acre by acre. The main television in the living room, the one Frank and I watched the nightly news on, was now a constant, flickering shrine to Brenda's reality shows or Kevin's violent video games. The sound of simulated gunfire and women screaming at each other became the new soundtrack of my life. My friends stopped coming by. They were erased, just like the furniture. Joyce, my best friend for 40 years, tried to visit. I watched from my bedroom window as she came up the walk, a small bakery box in her hand. Brenda met her at the door. She didn't open the screen, just spoke through the mesh. I couldn't hear the words, but I saw Joyce's face fall. She nodded, handed the box to Brenda, and walked away. Joyce called me later, her voice quiet, hurt. Margaret, honey, Brenda just makes it. Well, it's awkward. I feel like I'm bothering her, like I'm an interruption in her day. She said you were resting. I was not resting. I was in my room, reading. She's just busy, Joyce, I said, the lie tasting like ash in my mouth. It was a weak, pathetic excuse. After a few more attempts, Joyce stopped trying. Even my own daughter, Sarah, was kept at bay. Sarah is a lawyer, lives 2 hours away. She's busy, but she always made time for Sunday dinner. It was our ritual. Can you tell Sarah we're just really tired this weekend? Mum? Kevin would ask, already preempting my call. We've had a long week. If she called the house line, Brenda would answer, her voice full of false sweetness. Oh, hi, Sarah Margaret's just resting. We're trying to keep the house quiet for her. Maybe next weekend. Next weekend became next month. Next month became maybe after the holidays. The holidays came and went. I haven't seen my daughter in 4 months. I became a ghost in my own home. I was relegated to my bedroom. I started taking my meals on a tray, just to avoid the tension in the kitchen, to avoid the hostile silence from the living room. I was an unwanted tenant, a renter in the house Frank and I had built, in the rooms where we had raised our children and grown old together. I felt myself shrinking, becoming smaller, paler, quieter. I was disappearing. I was a book left on a shelf, gathering dust, my spine cracking, my pages unread. That is why the lock wasn't the first move. The lock was just the first time I bothered to look at the chessboard and realize I was in checkmate. It was the first time I decided to play back. My son, Kevin, is a stranger. It's a terrible thing for a mother to admit, but it is the cold, hard truth. The boy I raised, the one who loved science fiction novels and had a laugh that could fill a room, is gone. He's been replaced by this hollow man. He's a shadow who haunts my hallways, his shoulders permanently slumped, his eyes permanently fixed on the floor, or on his phone, or on Brenda. He avoids me. He hasn't made direct eye contact with me in what feels like a year. He used to be quiet, but present. Now, he is just absent. I knew that confronting Brenda was pointless. She is a locked door, impenetrable. But Kevin was my son. He was the weak link. He was the one who still, deep down, must have possessed a conscience. I waited a full day after the lock appeared, waited for him to notice, to say something, to apologize on his wife's behalf. He said nothing. He walked past the pantry, just as he walked past me, as if neither of us was there. I found him that night, standing in the kitchen, bathed in the cold white light of the open refrigerator. He was looking for a beer. I kept my voice soft. "Kev, honey." He flinched, a small, guilty jerk. He didn't turn around. "Hey, Mom." "Kev, about the pantry." He grabbed his beer and shut the door, plunging us both into the dim light from the hallway. "Mom, just let it go. Please. Let it go." My voice was sharper than I intended. "Kevin." She put a padlock on my pantry. "In my house." He finally turned, but he wouldn't look at me. He stared at the wall over my shoulder. "Mum, just drop it. Brenda is just trying to keep the peace. Okay?" The absurdity of the line, the sheer, idiotic, pre-scripted nonsense of it, ignited something in me. Keep the peace. Whose peace? Kevin. By locking me out of my own kitchen, by treating me like a child or a thief. He actually winced, like my words were physical blows. "Mum, don't start. Please. You don't get it. Work is insane right now. I'm under so much pressure." He started to back away, using his stress as a shield. I just can't deal with this." He fled. He didn't walk. He fled. Back to his office. Back to the wife who gave him his lines. He left me standing alone in the kitchen, my heart pounding with a frustration so deep it tasted like bile. The true betrayal came later. The walls in this old house are thin. It's one of the things Frank and I always meant to fix, add more insulation. I'm grateful, now, that we never did. I was in my room, trying to read, but my mind was stuck on the image of the lock. Then I heard them, their voices, muffled but clear, from Kevin's workspace. Kevin spoke first, his voice a low, unhappy rumble. "I think she's really, really upset about the lock. Brenda, maybe it's a bit much." A bit much. He'd used all his courage to muster. A bit much. Brenda's response was not a rumble. It was a razor. It sliced through the wall, sharp and clean. "Your mother needs to understand that this is our house now, too. She has to respect the new rules. You are either with me on this, or you are with her. Which is it?" "Kevin." I held my breath. I sat up straighter in my bed, my book forgotten in my lap. My ears were straining. I was waiting. I was praying. Be my son. Be a man. Tell her this is my home. Tell her you will not lock out your own mother. Silence. A long, thick, suffocating silence. It stretched for 10 seconds. 20. A full minute. In that silence, I heard everything. I heard his choice. I heard his cowardice. I heard the last, dying rattle of the love I thought he had for me. He had chosen. He had sided with the invader. The lock was an insult. The silence was the execution. I lay back down on my pillow, but I was no longer sad. The grief that had been my constant companion for 2 years finally evaporated, burned away by a cold, clear, clarifying rage. My heart, which had felt so bruised and broken, was suddenly hard, and it was, finally, quiet. The debate was over. I knew exactly what I was dealing with. The lock remained. A week passed. 7 days of walking past that cheap brass circle, a constant, petty reminder of my status in this house. I began to eat less, not out of protest, but because the act of asking Brenda to unlock my food for me was a humiliation I could not stomach. I subsisted on tea, toast, and the few items I kept in my room. My fixed pension, which had always been more than enough for my modest life, was starting to feel thin. The cost of everything was rising, and now I was being charged for the privilege of being a prisoner. That's when I thought of the money, my emergency fund, my nest egg, the $50,000. It had been about a year ago. Kevin had come to me, not in the kitchen, but in my bedroom. He knocked softly, a courtesy he had long since abandoned. He came in and sat on the edge of my bed, his head in his hands, and he cried. I had not seen my son cry since he was 12 and fell out of the oak tree in the backyard. "Mom," he'd choked out, his voice thick. "Mom, I'm in trouble. Real trouble." Brenda was, conveniently, not there. This was a performance for one. "What is it? Kevin? What's wrong?" "It's the business, Mum," he said, rubbing his eyes. "It's all falling apart. My partner, he's running it into the ground, and he wants out. He wants me to buy him out, or he's going to dissolve everything." He looked up at me, his eyes red-rimmed and desperate. "Brenda and we're going to lose everything. Mum, our future, everything we've worked for." He had me. How could he not? He was my son. "I need a loan," he whispered, as if ashamed. "Just to buy him out. Just $50,000. I'll pay you back." "Mom, I swear I will. With interest. You'll get every penny back. You're my only hope." $50,000. It was not a small sum. It was what Frank and I had saved for our dream. An Alaskan cruise. We were supposed to go the summer he retired. We were supposed to see the glaciers. After he died, I couldn't bring myself to spend it. It was our last what if. "You're saving our lives, Mum," he said, hugging me so tightly it hurt. I wrote him the check. From my retirement savings, from Frank's cruise money. I was standing at the kitchen counter this morning, sorting through the mail. It's a task I still insist on doing. It's one of the last remaining pieces of my old authority. Most of it was junk, coupons, and bills. And then I saw it. An envelope, glossy and expensive, from Prestige Motors. It was addressed to Kevin, and, like so much of the mail that came to him, it had already been opened, torn with a careless thumb. Brenda, no doubt. She was as nosy as she was cruel. Normally, I would have just placed it on the pile for him, but I was not my normal self. I was the woman who was being locked out of her own pantry. I thought it was junk. Another advertisement. I slid the single page out of the expensive envelope. It was not an ad. It was a letter. "Dear Mr. Reynolds," it began, in an elegant script. "On behalf of Prestige Motors, I want to personally thank you for your recent purchase of a certified pre-owned BMW X5 SUV. We know you will enjoy the luxury and performance for years to come. Welcome to the family." My hand went numb. The letter fluttered from my fingers onto the cold tile floor. The floor that had no rug. A BMW. My legs felt like they might not hold me. I made my way, hand over hand, along the wall to my old desk, the one they hadn't bothered to move, the one now covered in Kevin's charging cables and energy drink cans. I sat down. My hands were shaking, but not from weakness, from an icy, precise fury. I am a librarian. I am a researcher. I know how to find information. First, I logged into my bank account. I scrolled back through the last year of statements. There it was, the check, cashed, $50,000. The memo line read, business loan. Second, I opened a new browser tab. I went to the Clearwater County Public Records portal. I searched for business licenses and filings. I typed in the name of Kevin's small company, the one he had been so proud of. My heart was not pounding. It was perfectly, terribly still. The record loaded. The name of the company, the partners, and the date of dissolution. It had been officially, legally dissolved 2 months before he came to my bedroom. 2 months before he sat on my bed and cried. The money was never for a business. It was never to buy out a partner. It was never a loan. It was a lie. He had cried. He had lied. And he had stolen Frank's Alaskan cruise to buy his wife a luxury car. This wasn't weakness. This wasn't pressure. This was fraud. The betrayal was not a small, creeping thing. It was an abyss, and I was staring right into it. I sat at the desk, the computer screen glowing with the record of my son's dissolved business. I looked at the letter from Prestige Motors. I looked at the bank statement with the $50,000 withdrawal. The shaking in my hands stopped. The hot flush of shock and grief that had consumed me for 2 years simply vanished. It was like a fever breaking. I was left cold. But I was no longer sick. I was no longer a grieving widow. I was no longer a sad, disappearing old woman. I was Margaret Ann Reynolds, and I was furious. It was not a hot, screaming rage like Brenda's. It was a cold, structural, methodical rage. It was the quiet fury of a librarian who has just discovered that her entire collection has been deliberately miscatalogued. It was the resolve of someone who is about to refile everything and discard what is no longer necessary. I did not go to the attic. The attic is for dusty memories and sentiment. I went to the back of the hallway closet, behind the new, flimsy vacuum cleaner Brenda had bought and the box of Frank's winter coats I couldn't part with. Tucked in the back was a 2-drawer, fireproof, beige metal filing cabinet. It was ugly, heavy, and obsolete. I had bought it from the library surplus sale in the late 90s. It was my real home office. I unlocked it with a small key that I keep on a chain separate from my house keys. The drawer slid open with a heavy, metallic shing. My files are immaculate. Taxes, 1980, present. Medical. Pensions and investments. My fingers, steady and sure, moved past them all and landed on a thick, green, hanging folder labelled Home. I pulled the entire folder. I took it to my bedroom, locked my own door, and sat on my bed. I turned on the light Frank and I used to read by, and I began to catalogue my arsenal. The first document, the original deed to this house, recorded in 1987. I read the names Margaret Ann Reynolds and Frank Reynolds as joint tenants with right of survivorship. That meant when Frank died, his half did not go to an estate. It did not go to Kevin. It passed directly, instantly, and legally to me. I was the sole owner. Kevin's name was not on it. Brenda's name was a speck of dust. The second document, the mortgage satisfaction certificate, dated 11 years ago, paid in full. We had burned the original mortgage papers in the barbecue, a small, triumphant ceremony. This house was mine, free and clear. I owed nothing to anyone. The third document, a copy of my current will, drawn up 3 years ago, before Frank fell ill. It was simple. Upon my death, My entire estate was to be divided 50-50. Half to my son, Kevin Reynolds, half to my daughter, Sarah Reynolds. I looked at Kevin's name. 50%. The price of a lie and a BMW. The price of a padlock. I took a pen from my nightstand and drew a single, clean line through his name. It was not a legal change. Not yet. But it was a declaration of intent. And then, at the very bottom of the folder, I found a thick manila envelope. Frank's familiar, heavy block script was written on the tab, Frank Personal. My heart gave a small, painful kick. I had never seen this before. It was not Frank's style to keep secrets. I opened the brass clasp. Inside were old army discharge papers, an insurance policy I thought we had cancelled, and a single, crisp, cream-coloured business card. It read, David Miller, attorney at law, estate, trusts, and family law. David Miller. I hadn't heard that name in years. Little Davy Miller. He'd been one of my library pages, a skinny, ferociously smart kid from the wrong side of the tracks. He'd worked the reference desk every afternoon for 4 years, shelving books, running the copier. He'd been brilliant. I'd helped him with his college applications. I'd written him a recommendation for law school, a glowing one. I looked at the clock. It was 4:30. I picked up my cell phone. I dialed the number. A crisp, professional voice answered. Miller Law Group. May I please speak to David Miller? I said, my own voice calm and measured. May I ask who is calling? My name is Margaret Reynolds. I'm an old acquaintance. There was a pause, then a click. A new voice came on the line. It was no longer the voice of a reedy teenager. It was deep, confident, and sharp. Mags Margaret Reynolds, is that really you? He remembered me. Hello, David? I said. I'm afraid I haven't kept in touch, but I find myself in a situation. Mags, it's incredible to hear your voice. What can I do for you? I took a deep breath, and then I gave him the facts. I did not cry. I did not waver. I gave him a concise, chronological report. The death of Frank. The just for a little while move-in. The systematic removal of my furniture. The isolation from my friends and daughter. The $50,000 loan. The BMW. I finished with the $10 padlock on my pantry door. He listened. He didn't interrupt. He just let me speak. When I finished, there was a long, cold silence on the line. But it was not Kevin's silence of weakness. It was David's silence of pure, focused calculation. Mrs. Reynolds, he said finally, and his voice was no longer warm. It was the voice of an attorney. Margaret, they aren't just organizing. They aren't helping. What they are doing, and what they did with that $50,000, is textbook elder financial abuse, and it is a crime. So, here is what we are going to do. Let's get to work. We have the fraud, Margaret, David said over the phone the next day. His voice was all business. The $50,000 loan is our hammer, but before we move, I need a clearer picture of their intent. You say they're controlling. You say they're isolating you. A judge will want more than your word for it. They'll paint you as a confused, grieving woman. But I am a grieving woman, I said, my voice quiet. I know, he replied, and his voice softened for just a moment. But you are not confused, and we're going to prove it. For now, I want you to lean into their perception. Be the confused, grieving woman they think you are. Be forgetful. Betrayal. We need to see just how far they're willing to take this. So, I began my performance. For 40 years, I ran a children's story hour. I know how to act. I forgot where I'd left my keys. I stood in the kitchen, patting the pockets of my cardigan with a look of manufactured distress. Brenda, dear, have you seen my keys? I just had them. Brenda sighed, a sound of profound irritation, and plucked them off the hook by the door, where they always are. They're right here. Mother Margaret, where they always are? Oh, I said, blinking. Oh, how silly of me. I asked Kevin what day it was. He answered, It's Tuesday. Mum. An hour later, I asked him again. He shot Brenda a look, a dark, knowing, weary look. It was a look that said, See, you were right. I was becoming the person they wanted me to be, an unreliable narrator of my own life. The next day, I took the bus to an electronics store 2 towns over. I used my cash. I bought a small, digital, voice-activated recorder, the size of my thumb. It was advertised for students to record lectures. I intended to record a conspiracy. I came home and placed it, carefully, inside a large, ugly porcelain vase in the living room. It was a wedding gift from one of Frank's aunts, a monstrosity of gilded flowers. Brenda hated it, but hadn't yet gotten around to donating it. No one would ever look inside. The trap was set. I just had to wait. I didn't have to wait long. 2 days later, Brenda announced she was having a guest. My mother is stopping by for a drink. Mother Margaret, she said. It was not an invitation. It was a warning to stay in my room. We'll be in the living room, so we'd appreciate some quiet. Doris. I'd met Brenda's mother a few times. A hard-faced woman with expensive highlights and eyes that, like her daughter's, seemed to be constantly appraising the value of everything they landed on. I smiled my frail, silly smile. Oh, that's lovely. Dear, don't you worry about me. I'm going for a nice, long walk. My old legs need the exercise. Brenda's relief was palpable. Good. You do that. I left the house at 4 o'clock, just as Doris's white convertible pulled into my driveway. I walked down the street, turned the corner, and waited a full 5 minutes. Then, I circled back, cutting through my neighbour's yard, and slipped into my own backyard. I crouched among my dead roses, beneath the living room window. The window was open a crack to let in the spring air. I was hidden. I was invisible. And I was listening. I heard the clink of ice in glasses. Laughter. Sharp and humorless. So, has she budged on the house yet? Doris asked, her voice like gravel. Brenda laughed, a short, ugly snort. Forget it. But it won't matter soon. She's finally losing it. For real this time. It's actually getting bad. Bad how? She's completely addled. She asked Kevin what day it was 3 times yesterday. 3. She's misplacing everything. Kevin's finally seeing it. He's finally realizing she's not capable of managing her own affairs anymore. The lock on the pantry. She barely even put up a fight. Just looked confused and went to her room. My blood ran cold. Doris's voice dropped, became conspiratorial. You should look into a conservatorship. Bren. You know, like that singer. What's her name? If she's incompetent, a judge can appoint Kevin to manage her finances. All of it. The house. The money. Everything. It just takes a doctor's signature. There was a pause. the clink of a glass being set down. "I'm already on it?" Brenda said, and my hand flew to my mouth to stifle a gasp. I've been documenting her episodes for a month. I've already found a doctor, a friend of a friend, who's willing to do an evaluation next week. He's very sympathetic. "Brenda, you are so smart," Doris said, full of admiration. "It's not smart," Brenda replied, her voice slick with false modesty. "It's just necessary. We have to protect her and protect our future." I stayed crouched in the dirt, behind the dead thorns, for a long time after their voices faded. I waited until I heard Doris's car start, until I heard the front door close, until the house was silent. I walked back in through the kitchen. Brenda was wiping down the counters. She looked up, startled. "Oh, you're back." "Yes," I said, giving her my vacant smile. It was a lovely walk. I almost got lost. But then I found my way. I went to my room. Later that night, when they were asleep, I retrieved the recorder from the vase. My hand did not shake. My fingers were perfectly steady as I pressed the stop button. I had them. This was never about a $10 lock. This was about my life. This was about my freedom. And they had just handed me the evidence to win it back. I did not sleep. I sat in the dark of my bedroom, the digital recorder on my nightstand, a silent, black sentinel. I listened to the house settle. I heard Kevin cough. I heard the plumbing groan as Brenda took her nightly bath. I heard them turn off their television. And then I waited. At 4 a.m., a time when the world is either dead asleep or just beginning to wake, I rose. There was no hesitation. My body, which had ached for 2 years, felt light and strong. The arthritis in my hands was a distant memory. I did not go to the kitchen first. I went to the garage. The garage was cold and smelled of oil and old potting soil. It was Frank's domain. I walked to his workbench, a place I had rarely touched, and hanging on the pegboard, exactly where he had left it, was his set of bolt cutters. They were heavy, blue, and over 2 feet long. He'd used them to cut thick wire for his tomato cages. I lifted them off the hooks. The metal was cold and perfectly balanced. I walked back into my house, a silent operator. I stood in the kitchen. The only light was the weak grey of the pre-dawn filtering through the window. And there it was, the padlock, a $10 symbol of my supposed irrelevance. I opened the handles of the bolt cutters, placing the small brass shackle between the jaws. I squeezed. It took less effort than I expected. The sound was not a click. It was a snap, a loud, metallic, definitive crack that echoed in the silent house. It was the loudest, most satisfying sound I had ever heard in my life. The lock fell in 2 pieces to the floor. I picked up the severed, broken hasp and the useless lock. I placed them on the gleaming white quartz countertop, right where Brenda would see them. An offering. I turned on the kitchen desk lamp, the one bright circle of light in the room. I took a piece of my good, heavy, cream-coloured stationery from the desk drawer. Not a notepad, not a scrap of paper. I took the stationery I used for formal condolences, and I took my favourite pen, the one with the permanent black ink. I sat down. I did not write, "I am hurt." I did not write, "How could you?" I did not write a single emotional, pleading word. I wrote a legal document. I wrote a charge sheet. "Dear Brenda and Kevin," I began. My handwriting was as clear and steady as it had ever been. "This is not a discussion. This is a notification. effective immediately. You will begin making arrangements to vacate this property. The timeline for your departure will be determined by my attorney. You seem to be operating under a series of grave misapprehensions, which I will now correct, one this house. You have referred to it as your house. This is a factual error. The deed, which I have in my possession, lists me, Margaret Ann Reynolds, as the sole owner, following the death of my husband. Your names do not appear on it? 2. The $50,000. 1 year ago. Kevin. You solicited a loan of $50,000 from my retirement fund under the pretense of buying out a business partner. My attorney has acquired the county records, proving your business was dissolved 2 months prior to this request. He also has the bill of sale for the BMW X5 you purchased 4 days later. This is not a loan. This is felony fraud. 3. My competency. I am in possession of a digital audio recording from 2 days ago, wherein you, Brenda, and your mother, Doris, conspire to have me declared incompetent. You discuss retaining a doctor to perform a fraudulent evaluation for the express purpose of seizing my assets, including this house, via a conservatorship. This is not organisation. This is not helping. This is a coordinated campaign of isolation, elder financial abuse, and a criminal conspiracy to defraud. You mistook my grief for senility. You mistook my silence for weakness. This is a common and often fatal error. All further communication will be directed through my legal counsel, Mr. David Miller, of the Miller Law Group. His card is attached. Do not speak to me directly. He will be in contact. I finished the letter. I read it over once. It was perfect. I stapled David's business card to the bottom. I did not fold it. I walked over to the pantry door, using the clear packing tape Brenda kept in the junk drawer. I affixed the letter to the wood, right where the hasp had been drilled. It was a formal proclamation, posted on the door of the citadel. Then, I walked to the coffee maker. I put in a filter. I scooped in my favourite, expensive coffee. The coffee I had not been able to access for a week. I sat at the kitchen table, the bolt cutters resting on the floor beside me. And as the sun began to rise, I sipped my coffee and I waited. At 6:15, I heard her. Brenda's soft-footed tread on the stairs. She entered the kitchen, phone in hand as always, and stopped. I saw her eyes move, first to me, sitting at the table, then to the broken, defeated lock on the counter, and finally, her eyes landed on the white paper taped to the pantry door. She walked toward it, a look of pure confusion on her face. She began to read. I watched. I saw her shoulders tense. I saw her hand, the one not holding the phone, clench into a fist. I saw the blood drain from her face, the angry, ruddy flush being replaced by a waxy, paper-white, sickly pallor. She had read the word fraud. She had read the word recording. She had read the name David Miller. She was, for the first time since I had met her, utterly and completely silent. The Queen had been checkmated. The silence lasted for 3 full seconds. Then the chaos began. Brenda's reaction was not to speak, but to scream. It was a high, thin, animal sound of pure rage and panic. Kevin. I heard a heavy thud from upstairs, then the frantic pounding of feet. Kevin stumbled into the kitchen, his hair a mess, wearing a wrinkled t-shirt and boxer shorts. He looked terrified. What's wrong? What happened? Brenda didn't speak. She couldn't. She was pointing at the letter, her whole body shaking, her face a mask of disbelief and fury. Kevin's eyes followed her finger. He squinted, confused, and then he read. I sipped my coffee. I watched as my son's face, line by line, collapsed. He didn't turn white like Brenda. He turned a blotchy, sickly grey. His legs seemed to give out, and he half fell, half slid into one of the kitchen chairs, his head falling into his hands. "Oh, God," he whispered. "Oh, Mom. Oh, God." Brenda finally found her voice. It was no longer the flat, bored tone of a tyrant. It was the shriek of a cornered animal. You spied on me. You were recording me. That's illegal. You can't do that. I'll have you arrested." I raised my eyebrows, took another sip of coffee. "Will you?" "Dear, I wonder what you'll tell the police you were discussing that you didn't want recorded. Conspiracy to commit fraud has such an ugly ring to it." She lunged, not at me, but at the letter, ripping it from the door. "This is nothing. This is garbage. The original is with my attorney," I said calmly, "as is the original recording, and the original bank statements. That, my dear, is just a copy." That stopped her. She crushed the paper in her fist. Kevin, meanwhile, slid from the chair onto his knees. He actually crawled, on his hands and knees, over to my chair. He grabbed my hand. It was clammy and cold. "Mum, please." He wept. The tears were real this time, not the calculated performance in my bedroom. This was the raw, pathetic terror of a child who had been caught. "Mum, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. We'll fix it. I'll sell the car. I'll pay you back. Every cent. Please, Mom, don't do this. Don't kick us out. Please. I'm begging you." I looked down at the top of his head, at his thinning hair. I felt nothing. No pity. No anger. Just a vast, cold emptiness. "It's not about the money anymore, Kevin," I said, my voice flat. I pulled my hand from his grasp. "You can't pay back trust. You can't sell a car and get back my respect. This is about what you did. What you chose." He just sobbed, his face buried in the seat of my chair. Then Brenda, in a remarkable display of mental gymnastics, shifted tactics. The shrieking stopped. The panic was locked away. She composed her face, smoothed her hair, and even produced a wobbly, tearful smile. She walked over and knelt beside her husband, placing a supportive hand on his back. "Mother Margaret," she said, her voice dripping with a sweetness so false it was nauseating. "He's right. We're so sorry. I haven't been myself. I've been so stressed. The move, the new job, trying to help. I just got overwhelmed." She looked up at me, her eyes wide and pleading. "I never meant any of those things. Not really. I was just venting to my mother. You know how it is. We love you. We really, truly love you. Your family." It was a masterful performance. I would have almost been impressed if David hadn't warned me. "They will either fight," he had said, "or they will grovel. The groveling is the more dangerous of the two. Do not, under any circumstances, believe it." I looked at Brenda's loving, concerned face. I looked at my son, sobbing at my feet, a perfect tableau of regret. I pretended to soften. I let out a long, shaky sigh, as if I was exhausted by all the conflict. This is all just so much," I said, my voice trembling slightly. Brenda's eyes lit up. Just a flicker. She thought she was winning. I don't want all this, I continued, gesturing to the broken lock. The letter. I just want my family. I looked at Kevin. This isn't how we should be. No. Mum, Kevin said, looking up, his face slick with tears and hope. No, it's not. All right, I said, as if making a great, difficult concession. Let's talk. Just us. No. No lawyers? No threats? I looked at Brenda. Just us. As a family? We can solve this. As a family? I offered them a date. Come, let's all cool down. We'll talk on Saturday. Saturday, at 10 a.m. We'll sit in the living room, and we will find a way through this. The relief that washed over them was a physical wave. Kevin scrambled to his feet, wiping his nose. Yes, Mum. Thank you. Thank you. Saturday is perfect. Brenda stood too, dabbing at a non-existent tear. Oh, Mother Margaret. Thank you. You won't regret this. We'll make it right. They fled, retreating upstairs to their remote workspace, no doubt to celebrate their successful manipulation of the senile old woman. I sat in the kitchen, alone, and finished my coffee. An hour later, a notification popped up on my laptop, the one I'd left open on the kitchen desk. When David had suggested installing a passive monitoring program on my own Wi-Fi network, which I paid for, I had been hesitant. It's your property, Margaret, he'd said. You have a right to know who is using your network and for what, especially if it's to commit a crime against you. It was a text message, from Brenda's phone to her mother, Doris. It worked. She bought it all. The old fool is back in her box. She actually thinks we're going to talk. She wants a family meeting on Saturday. No lawyers. She's so stupid. Get Uncle Mark ready. We're going to let her talk, and then he's going to walk in, and we'll see who's in control. Uncle Mark, their shady, disbarred in 2 states cousin, who called himself a legal consultant. I looked at the message. I looked at the bolt cutters still sitting by my chair. I smiled. Saturday it is, I said to the empty room. Saturday morning. 10 o'clock. Sharp. The stage was set. My daughter, Sarah, had come over the night before. I told her everything. The tears in her eyes were not for me, but for the brother she thought she knew. And then, her sadness hardened into a resolve that matched my own. She went to my storage unit and she brought back Frank's armchair. I was sitting in it now, in my living room. The worn burgundy leather felt like an embrace, a suit of armor. Across from me, perched nervously on the edge of that sterile white leather love seat, were Kevin and Brenda. They looked scrubbed, sincere, and utterly false. Brenda began, as I knew she would. She leaned forward, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were white. She'd managed to work up a few tears, which pooled in her eyes without falling. "Mother Margaret?" she whispered, her voice trembling with manufactured emotion. "We've done nothing but talk and think. We are just so truly sorry. We lost our way. We just want to make things right. We just want our family back." Kevin, my hollow son, nodded, his eyes wide and pleading. "She's right, Mom. We'll do anything. Just tell us what to do." I let the silence hang in the air. I let them marinate in their own performance. I looked at Brenda's tear-streaked face. I looked at Kevin's desperate expression. I'm so glad you asked, I said. My voice was not the reedy, confused whisper they had grown used to. It was the voice of Margaret Reynolds, head librarian. A voice that had quieted auditoriums and commanded budgets for 40 years. It was clear, cold, and final. As if summoned by my words. The doorbell rang. Brenda and Kevin both startled, their heads whipping toward the door. They looked at each other, a flicker of panic in their eyes. Brenda was expecting her Uncle Mark to make a triumphant entrance, but not this early. "Who is that?" Kevin asked. Before I could answer, the front door opened. I had given them a key. David Miller walked in first. He was not the skinny library page I remembered. He was a 6-foot-tall man in a perfectly tailored dark suit, carrying a heavy leather briefcase. He looked like a weapon in human form. Right behind him was my daughter, Sarah. Her face was calm, her lawyer's gaze missing nothing. And behind Sarah, in a crisp brown uniform, was a uniformed deputy from the Clearwater County Sheriff's Office. Brenda's face, the entire mask of sorrow, simply shattered. It vanished. All that was left was the raw, ugly shock beneath. She shot to her feet. "You," she shrieked, her finger stabbing the air at me. "You said no lawyers. You said family. You lied to us." I leaned back in Frank's chair, the old leather groaning in satisfaction. "No, Brenda," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. "I said we would talk, and we did. You apologized. I listened. I gestured to my team, are here for the consequences. This is not a negotiation. This is an eviction." David Miller stepped forward. All business. He opened his briefcase and took out 2 thick stacks of paper. He placed them on the white coffee table with a heavy, definitive thud. "Mr. Reynolds, Mrs. Reynolds," David said, his voice filling the room. "You are hereby served with a formal 30-day notice to vacate this property." "You can't," Brenda screamed, lunging for the papers. David didn't even flinch. "The notice," he continued, as if she hadn't spoken, "cites ongoing elder financial abuse, conspiracy to defraud, and intentional infliction of emotional distress." He then slid a separate, thinner packet directly toward my son. "And Kevin Reynolds, you are hereby served with a civil summons for the fraudulent acquisition of $50,000. We will be seeing you in court." Kevin just stared at the papers, his mouth open, a small, choked sound caught in his throat. But Brenda exploded. The last shred of her loving daughter-in-law persona was incinerated. She was pure venom. "You old bitch!" she screamed, her face turning a blotchy, furious red. "You miserable, senile old hag. You won't get away with this. We'll fight you. We'll countersue. We'll tell everyone you're crazy. We'll tell the judge you're incompetent. You'll get nothing. You'll die alone in this house." She was ranting, spitting, her hands clenched into fists. I did not raise my voice. I simply turned my head and offered a polite, inquiring nod to the sheriff's deputy, who had been standing silently by the door, observing everything. "And that," I said, my voice cutting through her tirade like glass, "is precisely why he is here." Brenda froze, her mouth still open. "He is here, at my request, as a civil standby," I continued, "to witness and to formally document any and all threats you make against my person or my property. Please, continue. I believe you were just calling me senile." She snapped her mouth shut. The sound was deafening. She looked at the deputy's impassive face. She looked at Sarah's cold anger. She looked at David's legal authority. And finally, she looked at me, sitting in my husband's chair, in my house, entirely in control. She knew. It was over. I picked up the cup of hot tea Sarah had placed beside me. I took a slow, deliberate sip. The war was won.